from Hiroshima, Japan. They were farmers and were sharecropping in California. And that's where I grew up, in the farms of Central California. Living in the country, going to one-room schoolhouses, having very carefree outdoor life. You're bare feet all summer. And we had no electricity, maybe one faucet with running water. And all the cooking was done with wood stoves, or in the case of some places, peat, which covers the whole delta area. You dig that up and dry it and use it for fuel. And going to one-room schoolhouses, of course you didn't learn very much because you had all 8 grades in one room with one teacher, with no electricity, outhouses, and a water pump outside, and that's it. It was immigrant farmers farming land that was owned by Caucasians or companies, and my dad was very unsuccessful. So we moved from farm to farm, year to year, and none of them did very good because as a sharecropper, you only get 50 or 60% of price of the produce. In our case, it was celery or asparagus, and you only got an income after the crop was sold on the market. And in the meantime, you had to hire people to work on the farm and maintain it. So it was a tough life. I learned to shoot, not very well, but and fish. We did a lot of that. In one of the country areas where I lived, my parents were Buddhists, but we were on the country. There are no Buddhist churches, and they were practicing Buddhists, but we did not have a church to go to. There was a church, an Episcopal church, and in the community, right next to the grammar school. And some of the kids started going. Most parents were Buddhists. There were very few Christians or Catholics, none that I know of. But a bunch of us went, and we knew nothing about Christianity, but it was a place where we'd go to Sunday school and services and Christmas and Easter celebration. Some people were getting baptized, so I says, well, I'll get baptized too. Well, we were economically segregated. We lived in Japanese communities, and eventually when we moved to town, Stockton, California, in Central California, we lived in an area inhabited mostly by Japanese and Japanese Americans. The first generation is called Issei, when they came from mostly rural communities in Japan, because the country needed farmers. And but when we moved to town, it was a city. In my estimate, it was 49,000, but it was pretty big. And students came from their one-room schoolhouse and community schools in the outlying farm areas to a central high school in town. So that was the introduction to living in a community. It was somewhat traumatic because coming from the rural area into the towns where they had much more advanced elementary school teaching and such, it was quite tough catching up with the rest. And I almost flunked some years because I was so far behind compared to my classmates. When I went to high school, I had a wonderful biology teacher. I still remember his name, Mr. Snooks. He was an expert on snail classification, and he was so enthusiastic about everything biology that at a young age I took it as a freshman, and I think I was only 13 or 14, and he instilled in me the love of it. I always liked animals anyway, and wild animals and such, but he instilled on me the love of general biology. And the Japanese are compulsive about taking baths, and it was a community area where for a few cents they'd come and take a bath. It was a community. There were some individual baths, Western style, but there were two large bathtubs and bathrooms separated men and women. In Japan, it used to be common bathroom, but they separated the men and women, and many people would be in the bath at the same time. You do most of the washing outside, and then you soak in the hot tub. I just took the normal academic course. When I finished, I wasn't a spectacular student, but I was adequately had caught up. And I could have gone to UC Berkeley. I remember passing what's called the Bonehead English course, which you had to have. Otherwise, you'd have to go to the university and take basic English over again. But I went to a local junior college for 1 year. Then my parents decided that there was not much future in Japanese Americans in going to college or university. And I loved automobiles. I learned to drive around 12. I had a car by 14, and would hang around people repairing them. I went to college, which was, again, a junior college, which was part of the College of the Pacific, part of the in town. And it was very interesting, and I liked it very much, but my parents thought that there was no future, so since you like tinkering with cars and such, why don't you become an auto mechanic? And at a great sacrifice to them, they sent me off to a trade school in San Francisco, which is 90 miles away, and spent a year learning the ins and outs of auto mechanics. It was, and about the only real discrimination I felt was that after we got out, and I had a chance to work in a Caucasian shop where they did brakes and frame straightening and such, but I couldn't continue because they would not let me into the auto mechanics union. Well, they said they didn't want any Japanese American in the union. So I worked in other service stations and other garages. It was finally a Seventh-day Adventist Ford dealer in a town next to Stockton, which is called Lodi. He hired me, and I was working there in 1941, in February, about 10 months before Pearl Harbor. They put me into an ordnance unit in which we repaired cars and trucks, and eventually we were going to learn how to take care of weapons and such. But it was a completely mixed unit. The blacks, as you may know, were put in segregated black units, but we Asians, and I only know other Japanese Americans. For instance, in our unit quartermaster, there were about 250 men in the company, about 25 Japanese Americans, and we were accepted completely until Pearl Harbor. Then they didn't know what to do with us. They took our rifles away, and we sort of sat in limbo until it was decided In the meantime, my parents were put into internment camps. They were all rounded up, my two sisters, mother and father, as well as my uncle, aunt, and cousins. Here I was in the army, my parents were being rounded up. I did not even get to go back home to arrange for their getting rid of household goods and abandoning their business and moving into community camps. But we have a basic philosophy of accepting what's told of us, and we recognize this as authority, and you bear with it. Make the most of what is asked of you. So I accepted my position, and so did my parents. They went along. They could only take along what they could carry, so that wasn't very much. And they ended up in Arkansas. So they took all the Japanese American out of the units on the West Coast. I was at Camp Han near Riverside, California, and they shipped us back east. I was in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, but we were all in non-combat service. We were, again, I was an auto mechanic. Others were orderlies, gardeners, chauffeurs. We were treated fine, except we were completely segregated. I remember going to the South, and they said, "Now, you don't go into rear of the bus, or to colored or black restrooms, or sit in the back in the movies." It says so. They made an effort to not discriminate us to that extent. So, but we were separated, and after almost a year in Fort Sill, they selected a bunch of us to go to Mississippi, Camp Shelby, Mississippi, which exists to this day, for training. Now, Roosevelt and the Secretary of War at the time had decided to form a Japanese-American unit, a segregated unit, so that it could serve as a model. Or, you see, our numbers are so small. The combat team is less than 5,000. With all the replacements and all, there were probably 9,000 or 10,000 that was involved with the unit that I was in. But compared to the 15 to 16 million servicemen in World War II, we're just a drop in the bucket. And they wanted to make us more visible by forming a unit, a combat unit, and even asking those that were interned whether they'd be willing to join the military and go into combat for the U.S. Most of them agreed, some did not, and they were sent to a special camp in Tule Lake, California. But most agreed. In fact, many volunteered out of these camps to be part of our combat units. And there was another facet of military service for us. Since some of us knew how to read and write Japanese, they wanted us to be intelligence department, S2 it's called, where we interrogate Japanese soldiers or their documents, and they're called military intelligence service. These were sent to special camps to learn Japanese, and were dispersed between different groups, so that they were not a distinct group, but a few would be in different headquarters, divisions, and such. And generally not in active combat, but interrogating prisoners, reading maps, decoding messages and things of that sort. I steadfastly refused because that wasn't my idea of being in a war. So I volunteered to become an instrument sergeant, which involved learning how to be a forward observer, to direct artillery fire. So I volunteered for this, and I said, there was a fellow in one of the gun batteries who was the same rank as me, but was in this instrument section, and he thought the job was too demanding, so he scuttlebutt got it that he wanted out. So he changed his staff sergeant stripes to corporal, and became a corporal in some other unit. So I volunteered, and with some reluctance, the captain, whom I got to know quite well, Edmund Ratcliffe from West Virginia, he said, "I'll give you a shot at this." He looked up my record, and I was accepted. This was during training in Mississippi, so I learned the basic duties of firing artillery and directing, and went with them overseas in this position. And of course, it's one of the most, or perhaps the most dangerous designation in the Army, because the enemy does not like to have artillery fire. And unlike present-day war, artillery was directed on targets that were visible. You can't shoot a rocket through a window in Afghanistan. We had to see we had to either see the building, see the truck, see the machine gun, or whatever target to direct artillery. So it's a very dangerous position. And if I may interject, my mother used to write me once or twice a week and urge me. Oh, she was proud that I was in the Army. Most Japanese revere soldiers. I guess it's their militaristic background but she said, don't expose yourself to any dangerous situation. And I didn't answer directly, but I said yes, and I never told her that I volunteered for this position. In Italy, I went along with other forward observers and did fire some shots. Then we got transferred to France. They gave 5 or 6 of us battlefield commissions to second lieutenant, and we had an option of accepting or rejecting this. And when I inquired whether I'd be sent to some other unit, I'd be separated from my buddies and trainees, they said, no, you keep your same job, you do exactly what you're doing, you get a raise in pay, staff sergeant $90 to $190, uniform allowance, rest camp, and you bought gold bars and became an officer. So I said, well, I have nothing to lose, have I? So I accepted. Well, what a forward observer does is, as I said before, you get to some vantage point. So it depends on the terrain. If there's a mountain or a tall building or something behind you, you get on that. But you have to have a clear vision. So it can be ahead, it can be besides, or some vantage point. You're connected with radio, and whenever possible with telephone. You string telephone wire back to Fire Direction Center. So when the infantry or anybody sees a likely target, or you can see them, you can see a machine gun nest in a road corner, or a building where it's obviously a command center with brass going to it for meetings. You designate that as a target. Then we had fairly good maps, sometimes even aerial maps, and they all have coordinates. So you give the coordinates, or you identify the target, and wherever the guns are, they might be on either side, behind, or even they could even be ahead of you. But they tell you, you designate the target, and they put ranging rounds that only one gun fires, number 2 gun. And if that light is the target, you direct it as though you're seeing it, not from where the guns are. They calculate from their gun position back to you and the target. And what you do is you ask for a marker round. Sometimes it's a regular explosive or a smoke round to see where your guns are. You fire the gun, and when your shell lands, if it's smoke, you can see it, the smoke come in. Otherwise, they tell you splash. They time the shell so that the explosion comes, and that's your marker round. From that point, you try to get on the target by bracketing it. You shoot, if you think it's 400 yards ahead, you estimate 800 yards back, and if it's 200 yards this way, you go 400 this way. So you say 800 short or 400 left or right, and you get the next round. Your objective is to get with as few rounds as possible near the target. And once you get on the target, you have all the guns coming in. If it's a big target, you have other batteries coming in. If it's a real big target, you can have every artillery piece within range on that target. But you have to see the target. About a week after I got my field commission, they called me one night. The captain called me and said, Lieutenant Ito, get your crew together. So I had 3 men. Only one, I think they might all be dead by now. I didn't lose anyone in combat. So we went out in the dead of the night. It was 10 or 11 o'clock in late last week of October. And the terrain was very unusual in that it was a managed pine lumber forest. There were no real roads, no buildings, no fortifications. It was just lumber trails and lots of very mountainous with dense cultivated trees. So the pretty uniform tree population. It was so heavily wooded that it was dark and dank throughout. And I still, whenever I go to a dark forest like that, it reminds me of, I don't have post-traumatic shock syndrome like some of my fellows did, but I still have that feeling of being in a dark forest. But I was attached to I Company, which was the lead company in the rescue effort of the 3rd Battalion. And as such, you have 2 platoons behind, and you're with the leading platoon. But since we couldn't see anything more than 100 yards or so in any direction, you actually could not find targets to fire on.
You okay, Cully? Where's that Jap artillery? Where is it?
Wildcat 6, this is Wildcat 2. Fire mission over. Fire mission, point. Fire mission, point. Fox Abel, Easy Baker, Mike Charlie. And point, King Sugar Charlie, Love, Abel Howe.
Wildcat 2, this is Wildcat 6. Stand by. One round smoke on way. One round smoke on way.
And as I recall, I only, during the 4 to 5 day rescue mission, I only fired one mission because there's a machine gun shooting up at us, and it was fairly close, but not close enough so that we could not try artillery on them. Mm-hmm. You knew the coordinates, only on the map. Mm-hmm. And so the captain asked me, there's this machine gun's holding us up. Do you think you can knock it out? He says, well, we'll give it a try. So unlike a visual direction of artillery on the target, I was forced to use sound. We never had training for this. I heard about it in the South Pacific. This was used all the time. But what you do is you get a smoke round or something was no use. So you ask for a round near the target. And other shells are going off, so you don't know what damn shell was going to be yours. Mm-hmm. So you ask for the target, and when they say fire, they tell you it's on the way. Mm-hmm. They have a stopwatch. They calculate how long the shell is going to take to land, and when it lands, they say splash, and you have to wait a second for every 1,000 yards, because sound comes very slow. And when that sound comes, you say, that must be my round, amongst the others that are landing. Then you direct it just by the sound alone, just to get closer and closer and closer. This is called creeping up to the target, which is an absolute no-no, because if you're the target and you see a shell landing in front of you and then it's closer and closer and closer, the observer has you in mind, right. But they're not bracketing you, and then you have a chance to dig like hell or run to some other place. Well, in the forest you cannot do this, right? So you're allowed to, and besides it was too close to us, so you're allowed to creep on the target. So you bring it closer and closer and closer. Furthermore, our artillery was notoriously inaccurate under these conditions because we had to fire at high angle. You see, the maximum range is a 45-degree angle. If the target's close, you shoot it more or less directly, and then higher and higher. Then if you go above 45 degrees, that's called high angle, and the shells go up and come down closer. The higher you elevate it, the closer the round lands. The big disadvantage of this is that atmospheric conditions, the temperature, the wind, and such, is so variable that 2 rounds fired at the same setting won't land at the designated spot. So that's high. So that's a big disadvantage. A further disadvantage. Creeping up on this target, left, right, and many more rounds than one would like to take. And suddenly you see a splash, and the damn shell lands behind you. So, that's a shock. So, obviously the mission was not going to be successful. So I said, cease fire, abandon the mission. And it was very frustrating to have such a mission, but under the circumstances, that's about all we could do. The shells were about 33 pounds, and we had several kinds of projectiles, armor-piercing, high explosive. We also were introduced with time fire. There was a little clock setting on the nose of the shell, and so they could time when the shells are going to land. When the shell is a few hundred yards above the target, the shell automatically bursts, and shell fragments, what they usually call shrapnel, but it's not really shrapnel, it's very razor-sharp edges of jagged steel that rain down on the target area. And they're very deadly. And even though we dig foxholes every night or even every day, whenever you're not actively advancing, you dig yourself a hole as deep and as wide as possible, especially at night, because artillery comes at night. And so this was our extent of the little artillery support we could give. But our unit suffered tremendous casualties. We had about 170 men, 60 to 70 men, and there are about 5 or 6 officers. Within a few days after we started out, all the officers were killed or wounded. A sergeant was in charge, and we ended up, when we rescued the lost, when we finally reached the lost battalion, there were 8 riflemen and a total of 16 or 17 of the 170 men left. Strangely enough, neither I nor the 3 men I had with me, we were in the midst of this. None of us even got wounded, which is to me, looking back with all the casualties around us, quite amazing. I never thought I wouldn't come back, and several times I thought I might have gotten wounded, but it was only some rock or I did not feel invulnerable, but I always had the feeling that in spite of everything that's happening around me, that I'm going to come through. I had great faith in I don't know what, and I carried a Bible, which that's the only thing I have. Then I carried what's known as a sennimbari, 1,000 stitches. It's a sash that almost every Japanese soldier carries into battle. And my mother made me one. I was embarrassed by this. Why should I have a Japanese protective sash? I carried it in my pocket rather than wear it. I didn't tell any of my buddies that I had one. And I really don't know anyone else who had one, although I hear a few others did. So I had these three items that I carried with me wherever. I took a lot of pictures. The negatives are I gave to the museum. And many pictures I've seen on various publications and TV and such. But there was again a mindset that here we are, we're fighting for America. Many of our parents are in these camps under very unusual circumstances, but there were fellows in my unit who would come up to me and say, please, Lieutenant Ito, will you take me up to the front next time you go? And I said, well, you know, you really don't have to go. It's not it's not your assignment. But I want to go see what it's like. And it was a prevailing curiosity, spirit, in the sense of invulnerability that made them want to go. And as far as I can remember, there was no one in the outfit, no one that wanted out, that didn't want to be in any dangerous position, that felt that it was wrong, that wrong being done to us. But maybe it was partly our youth, or and I think our commitment to our native country here was quite paramount in our behavior. I was inducted in February 1941, and my discharge was in 46, February 40. So it was a total of 5 years. I got back after VE Day in Germany. We were occupation troops until about December in Donauwörth, which is very near Munich. And our unit was disbanded, as were many American military units. I have four children. One died, my son died 4 years ago at 51, but left a granddaughter, and I have 3 others, one in San Francisco and 2 daughters here in Belmont. My son, his widow, lives in Falmouth with a 12-year-old, I'm a 5-year-old just starting kindergarten. They're all married Caucasians. So I have 5 grandchildren and my wife, and as I said, we've lived in this house since 1960. We get together quite often. In fact, 11 of us in the immediate family went to Washington, D.C. last week for the gold medal ceremony. And maybe you'd like to see the gold medal. It's the Congressional Gold Medal. It's the highest civilian award for any individual or groups. George Washington got one of the first ones, and recently the Tuskegee pilots and the Navajo Code Talkers, they got the gold medal as a unit, and ours is for our unit. The original one is solid gold, and they gave it to the representatives of the three of us by Congressman Boner. But the original medal goes directly to the Smithsonian Institute for display, and we have to buy these. So I've ordered a bunch of them to give to my kids and so forth. But that's understandable because there are thousands of us.
Yeah, still.
And no, I think everybody has the same reaction when you have to buy your own. Have to buy your own medal.